Hello everybody, welcome to part 2 of a Manifesto for European video games. In this part we're going to be looking at actions. In case you haven't watched part 1, my name is Dr. Matt Agis. I'm from NHTV, which is Brady University of Applied Sciences, and I'm part of the Gaming Horizons research project. So in part 1 of this talk we had a quick look at Gaming Horizons, the EU research project which has been looking at the content creation and culture of video games. Specifically, it's really studying the video game policy with alignment with the EU's goals of political, economic and cultural health in Europe. We introduced first part of the Manifesto of video games. We looked at the 5 foundational statements contained in the Manifesto as a starting territory for a mutual understanding of the reality of video games today. So just to quickly go through those again. Playfulness is a primary, unintentional and atavistic route to learning, looking at how playfulness is how we learn about the world and ourselves. All video games can improve or harm the lives of players regardless of type or authorial intentionality, showing that some games which appear antisocial can actually be very pro-social in their gameplay and their outcome. And vice versa, of course. Playing for its own sake is worthwhile activity. Games are often framed in this kind of very neoliberal system where, for example, relaxation is considered a beneficial thing for productivity in the workplace. We wanted to really take it out of that framing and just kind of go, relaxation, fun, enjoyment, pleasure is actually a worthwhile thing for society. It's really one of the goals of cultural health of the European Union. Foundational statement 4 was that all types of video games are already part of a wider discourse of a self-reflective society. What we mean by this is that they are actually already cultural artefacts which really help society express and understand itself if we looked at them in a closer way, and it could examine them from that perspective. And fifth, all video games combine the social sciences and humanities with technology and innovation. A lot of the time within European Union policy we find that games are actually looked at as an engineering process or a technological outcome, quite often without much focus on the social sciences and humanities aspects, which are crucial to the success of a video game and the enjoyment of the video game. So really making sure that we understand these things are a combined collaboration between many different forms of expression. Of course, we need to turn these foundations to action. The Gaming Horizons research really examined the needs of stakeholders around content creation and culture of video games. It found there was a mismatch between their needs and EU policy at the moment. 9 actions were developed that can address the stakeholder needs and help fulfill their potential video games for European society. So we're going to be going through these. These are quite long and wordy, but I'll be going through them individually, just explaining what they mean as we go. So moving on to action 1 here. The European Union should recognise and promote the arts, craft and engineering dimensions of games so they can reflect European values rather than predominantly market forces. Okay, so what do we mean by this? Well, improving cultural outputs to support social equality and respect is an explicit goal of the EU already, and frequently this is at odds with market forces. Games from outside the serious applied sector are largely excluded from European Union funding at the moment, particularly the major funding streams, so they're left to vie for attention of the public to maintain the financial stability of studios. These are often small groups or even sometimes mid to large sized studios, sometimes with even hundreds of people working on these games, and they are entirely reliant mostly on outside of public funding. The result is that some games will align with European values, sometimes, but others will court controversy or exploit players to cover future production costs. As part of a business, they need to be competitive. If the EU wishes to influence these behaviours, it must become involved as an intelligent supporter and participant in game content creation and culture. It really has to understand how games are made, why games are made in the particular way they are, and really what the outcome is of the thematic things that they address within these video games, or the mechanisms that are used within these video games. Currently, at the time of recording this, there's a lot of controversy over loot crates. Now, loot crates are a randomized system which can be very exploitative of players, but they can also be implemented in ethical and beneficial ways for both the player and for the business running it. So there's lots of different things to be investigated here. To make sure European values are supported, they need to be a very intelligent participant within this. So, action 2. The EU should insist on ensuring games support a balanced and diverse representation of European society. By this, we mean. We found during the project that it's been really clear that video games currently and historically reflect the systemic biases and the cultures that produce them. It must be stressed that video games are not unique in struggling to confront the darker legacies of our pasts, which still impact on lives today. We are no more culpable than cinema, television, theatre, music and other media. By this we mean the legacies of sexism, of slavery, of colonialism, of oppression of queer minorities. We see lots of different expressions of this in many different ways. Some games, both mechanics-focused games and playable interactive narrative experiences, Pines, games based on storytelling, they're already bringing culturally significant gameplay to audiences. But these are typically experimental games, smaller games, without the wider retail backing or market presence. And it's really uncertain whether such creative risks regularly reap financial rewards from a highly competitive video game market. If that market does not sufficiently support the games, that progress in social discourse and push the world forward, particularly surrounding games of looking at gender and minority rights, then the EU should find alternative support structures to allow these games to thrive and to exist, and to continue to enhance the discourse that video games put forward about society. Let's have a look at action number 3. Broad-based responsive research should be promoted to explore the deep structures of design and techniques of development underpinning all video game types. So, growing the business and culture of video games in Europe should be an economic priority. This is a huge business. This is the biggest entertainment business in the world. The medium is still in the growth stage and rapid changes and evolutions are still taking place. It is a time to act now and soon before lots of the progress happens the rest of the world. Introducing support to top academics to become involved in this field is likely to bring strong results for video game production capacity, cultural and critical voice of Europe in future decades. We don't deny the competitive challenges of collaboration with the games industry, so broad-based research must really look at the deeper questions of development. We know that for reasons of privacy, industrial competition, that sometimes it's very hard to get academics and industry people collaborating together, particularly the industry where there are sometimes millions of dollars or euros or pounds or yen at stake to try and make these things successful. So we understand that sharing your work with academics while it's in progress can be challenging. So we must look to support academics that look at the fundamentals of video games development, the design, the technology of them, to really push these things forward, to understand how narratives work and the impact these things have on the lives of players. It's a rapidly evolving industrial context, and so responsive research must also be able to study, theorize, test, and implement ideas and techniques to maintain relevance. It's very easy for people to start a 3-year-long research project which the industry has perhaps moved on from by the time the results are coming through. So it has to respond, it has to adapt, it has to change as the industry changes as well. It cannot be locked away in an ivory tower. Action 4. Video game research outputs and dissemination must take greater account of the innovative and very rapidly changing nature of game development or risk of relevance. The language, the dissemination media, and the timeliness of research outputs must match the cultural context and expectations of content developers. So this follows on from the previous point quite closely here. The traditional channels for dissemination of research results are inadequate for productive exchange of ideas with video games developers. During our research, during our interviews, during all the people we've talked to, we found that the developers who were aware of or even vaguely influenced by academic work were people who had either studied video game development at university or were currently teaching video game development at university. And none of them said they'd actually used academic work whilst in a production capacity. We are seeing a huge disjunction between what the academics are writing and what the developers are doing in the offices and in the studios. So 3 factors were identified by stakeholders for why academic input does not reach the private sector. The language it's written in is often too formal, very precise, but often too formal and puts people off. The dissemination media. Academic journals are not getting into studios. They're not penetrating the studios, finding people who are receptive for them and seeking out that information. And the timeliness. Sometimes a piece of work is done. It can be a very significant, well-structured piece of work, but the industry has moved on from that concern and has other questions that it would like to have answered. So with more rapid and adaptive research course structure, we might be able to make a start with this, but it's going to need to be matched with an emphasis on using relevant dissemination methods. This could be games as a demonstration of a research output, videos, video tutorials, webinars, different methods of using video content, which is very popular among developers as a way of doing their research. Industry conferences are attended by thousands of people all over the world, and they're great ways of getting ideas out quickly to an audience. Blogs, forums, online journals, different ways of sharing research results can be very impactful and very quick methods of getting information out to an industry. Of course, none of these improvements will be possible if researchers are tied to traditional career models, where peer-reviewed journal publication vastly outranks timely and informally expressed research. So national and EU funding policies must support increased academic and institutional recognition for non-traditional, unconventional research outputs. Within this Gaming Horizons research project, we've seen that the webinars have had thousands and thousands of views, which is, let's just say, a large part bigger than a lot of the readership of academic journals. So we can see that some of these informally expressed ideas of impact actually are much more powerful getting an idea out to a community. So we can see that the Action 4 is really addressing this idea of how do we talk to the people who we want to be using our ideas. Action 5. Research, education and social manifestations of video games must consciously include social sciences and humanities and responsible research and innovation principles, explicitly and emphatically in research calls, as a valued constituent of the education of upcoming game developers, and through support for the cultural phenomena surrounding video games. Quite a big chunk of ideas within this particular action here. So significant pieces of the social science and humanities work on video games, such as the articles and artefacts found during Gaming Horizons, were either unfunded, underfunded, or written outside of the academic context by cultural critics in the journalistic or blogging fields. We found that many games, if they are researched, are put into a negative context, such as violence or addiction. There's little emphasis on their social sciences and humanities contributions to culture. So support for the cultural value of video games should be situated as part of a wider emphasis on the intrinsic value that social science and humanities to a happy and healthy society that celebrates a really diverse range of the expressive arts. We really have to understand that games can add value, they can add artistic joy to the lives of people. And this is something important to us. It's not just about economic and political unity in the EU, it's about cultural health as well. So we have to understand that video games can be part of that. So we build understanding of ourselves through the cultural artefacts that we create, and the video games are inevitably going to be part of this in the future. It would be beneficial for the European community if our academics, writers and creators became leaders in this field. Action 6. Support should be provided for robust and informed criticism of video game content, creation and culture, contributing to their industrial and cultural future in both popular and academic media. As argued previously, without insightful reflection, then the evolution of the medium is going to be guided solely by market forces and a popular consensus rather than in the interests of a diverse population. We can see that yes, mass popularity is useful, but sometimes it does tend to leave people to the side. We've seen this happen in society enough times in the past to know that we want to avoid it happening again. Often individuals attempt to challenge problematic behaviours of game content, creation and culture, but such individual efforts are difficult to sustain without support and make the people vulnerable to attack, particularly if they're quite outlying in from society. Institutional support could give stability and support to critical voices that push the evolution of the medium. This is not a call for blanket support of all outsiders and outside voices, but it is an idea that we need to responsibly help people who are pushing forward the evolution of the medium. So this will need to be quite an informed decision made by the EU. Supporting robust and informed cultural criticism of video games is a contribution towards their industrial and cultural future, along with wider social benefits described in the foundational statements. Action 7. The EU must nurture responsible research and innovation principles as the foundation of European video games business through targeted research examining the impact of unethical game development practices. A bit more of a tricky one, but I think this is going to be a very, very important one for our future. Because although Gaming Horizons show many aspects of prosocial outcomes, both embedded in games and in the personal ethics of their creators, the creators are desiring these things, the developers are telling us this, there are always going to be new challenges arising from the development of video game media. The length of time spent playing games and the breadth of the population playing them means that risks and responsibility for ethical and unethical practices may be unusually high in video games when compared to other digital media industries. I think it's imperative that EU exercises its influence to improve the integration of responsible research and innovation with the video game industry through the development of compelling fundamental and applied research calls for all video game sectors: education, art, entertainment games, serious games, training games, these kind of things. So what we see here is that if we look back, 10 years ago, there were studies which showed how people navigate 3D space in Duke Nukem, so a 3D shoot-'em-up game, could actually reveal their level of depression. When we see these tiny aspects of personal information that can be extracted from the data here, we can see there are big oncoming ethical concerns. We've seen these kind of results repeated in different games. We can see that there's a big risk of personal intrusion, particularly with AI and big data analysis coming on here. So the EU is really going to need to make sure that video games understand the responsibility of the data that they're taking on board, the collection of data and how it's analysed within the context of society and the individuals that are playing. Action 8. The EU should prioritise the development of all-round teacher competencies as a keystone for further game-based learning. So many of the education-related problems highlighted in this manifesto are the result of a non-critical and somewhat naive view of games and learning, thinking that games are some sort of magic pill. Many of the players and educators we interviewed questioned the assumption that games, by definition, are this magic pill for boosting student motivation and engagement, and therefore, obviously, learning from that. They were doubtful that this was the truth. They didn't doubt that it could work, but they were doubted that it was being taken on in quite the right attitude at the moment. So the way forward is not so much to focus on the adoption of one particular game for learning, but on helping teachers to develop the competencies they need to harness the potentials offered by existing games of all kinds. Both the games designed for learning, the didactic games, serious games, applied games, but also artistic games, storytelling games, mechanics-focused games, economic simulations of starships and battles. We have all different types of games which can give us educational experiences from this. We saw during our interviews, multiple people mentioned the Assassin's Creed series has inspired them to learn about Renaissance Italy. Some of them even to travel to the locations. So we see people changing their lives, changing their patterns and their hobbies to learn more about different locations. We saw people developing teamwork skills from League of Legends or understanding physics from playing Portal. We can see there are all kinds of ways that games could be used in a classroom situation to enhance the learning of students. And it really takes a very flexible and broad understanding by teachers to allow this to happen. So teachers will need to develop an awareness, cultural understanding, and the ability to design learning activities that use games. Specialised training, focus on the area of teacher development, I think is going to be necessary to make this happen. This is one of the major outcomes we saw here for teachers specifically. They're going to need some support, need some training, because we really think this is a very powerful medium for them to be able to use. Action number 9. The EU should promote initiatives helping citizens and society at large to understand the role games play in personal development, especially of younger players. So in a broad part of society we're looking at here, video game play should become a prime opportunity for parents to spend quality time with their children, to accompany them to develop a period of life where they explore worlds on their own and develop their own personal and social identity. Both before Gaming Horizons and within Gaming Horizons, we see people expressing themselves through the games they play, exploring their identity, learning about themselves. And this continues on into adulthood. We're not only talking about children here. People learn about themselves through the games that they play. With this in mind, the EU should fund and promote initiatives helping to ensure that all those involved in decision-making about gaming and education are better informed and have a more nuanced attitude to the medium. Not just simply, this game is bad because it has violence, but perhaps looking at other characteristics of it, looking at other ways it could be explored. Minecraft, on the surface of it, is a game about surviving a zombie apocalypse. But it's been used in an educational context, it's been used to teach social dynamics, storytelling, physics, mathematics. There's all kinds of things that can be done with this one tool. So we can understand that there is a more nuanced attitude to this medium that can be incredibly productive and bring great results for the students and for teachers and for families that play with them. The goal should be able to raise video game literacy at the level of families, allowing them to gain understanding and control of the games that they engage with. Not simply an idea that games are just for children, but something that parents can engage with as well. And as a family unit, people can enjoy together. So in parallel with Action 6, which was about support for robust and informed criticism, future generations can be educated to critically navigate interactive media landscapes and to experience positive growth from these experiences. So, that was a long list. It's quite intense, I know, but I think there's some powerful things within this. We need to exercise caution around arbitrary delineations that are intended to indicate social merit and worthiness of one video game over another. We need to recognise and navigate individual benefits of different games to help us really release their potential. We need to step away from neoliberal instrumentalisation of leisure that frames pleasure as a path only worth pursuing when it leads to economic productivity. We need to embrace the cultural health of people, the happiness, relaxation as an end to itself for happy people. Happiness is a goal of society, not just GDP. Policy must directly engage with video game content creation and culture to play a role in shaping the way that games change the lives of children and adult audiences. The average age of a player is around 36 at the moment. This is not something only for children. That means that for every 56-year-old playing a game, there's a 16-year-old, and vice versa. We can see that this age range playing games is hugely diverse and much more broadly spread through society than many of the stereotypes would make us think. And this is a problem. I think this name game makes it sound trivial. It makes it sound almost immature. But we're working at the birth of a new expressive medium here. We're seeing something come into life that is completely unique in the history of entertainment. Games will continue to be made regardless of European policy, but without changes, their leadership is going to fall outside of Europe. It's not a matter of supporting them or they'll disappear, but it's our choice of whether and how we interact with them as a society. If we can take a grasp of video games, we can become a major global player within this, both for the good of European citizens, but also for our researchers, for our children, for our families, and for our friends. If you'd like to know more about Gaming Horizons and to read the full manifesto, which is a longer version than this, you can download that and see some more information on gaminghorizons.eu. I hope you've enjoyed this second part of the video. If you haven't seen the first part, do check it out on the web. But for the moment, I want to say thank you very much for listening, everybody. Thank you all. Thank you.